Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon to everyone joining us. This is Jessica Dalzell from Ohio EPA. We'll be starting our session here in just a couple of minutes. We still have quite a few folks logging on. Welcome to those of you joining us, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jessica Dalzell. This is our last session of Ohio EPA's 2023 Sustainability Conference, so thank you for joining along. I will be moderating this afternoon's Farming for a Sustainable Future session. We have had 12 sessions over the last 3 days, and like I said, this will be our last session. If you would like any information on previous sessions, please check out our Ohio EPA conference webpage. All of the sessions have been recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel. Many of you have probably already learned from our previous presentations and sessions how to utilize the attendee interface, but I will go over a few items to make sure that you know how to participate for those of you that are joining us for the first time. On this slide, you can see an example screenshot of your attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your computer desktop to the right-hand side. For this presentation, if you are having sound issues or if the slides stop advancing, start by refreshing your browser. And if that doesn't work, you can try leaving the webinar and coming back in. If you're still having issues, please let us know in the question pane and we will try to help you out. Please also feel free to submit any questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on the question mark icon. We will save all of the questions for the question and answer portion once each of our speakers has completed their presentation. But again, feel free to submit those at any time. You can click on the document icon to view a PDF file of the PowerPoint slides used for today's presentation. And like I mentioned previously, the session is being recorded, so you will receive a link to the recording and a follow-up email. It is now my pleasure to introduce our three fantastic presenters for today. First up, we'll hear from Amelie Lipstrew from OFA. Amelie is the Policy Director at the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association. She has more than 25 years of public and social service experience and joined OFA in 2014, where she focuses on food systems policy at the state and federal levels. Her work at OFA is focused on policy to enable sustainable and organic farmers to thrive, increase the availability of local food to nourish our communities, and agricultural practices that protect and enhance our environment. Next up, we'll hear from Annie Wismeyer from 80 Acres Farms. Annie is the Sustainability Manager at 80 Acres Farms, and she is responsible for documenting the company's carbon footprint and driving improvements by developing and deploying a comprehensive sustainability strategy. Annie's work in sustainability at 80 Acres Farms aligns with her academic experience, professional experience, and personal passions. Last but not least, we'll hear from Christy Buskirk from Clay Hill Produce and Flowers, Clay Hill is a small certified organic produce and flower farm in northern Ohio with 10 acres under production and 40 acres in cover crops, native grasslands, and forest. Clay Hill markets their produce and flowers at their local markets in the Toledo area, as well as some wholesale and flower bouquet add-ons to other local farmer CSAs. Started in 2014, Clay Hill has grown to utilize 4 high tunnels and a greenhouse for almost year-round vegetable production. Clay Hill is a husband and wife team of Aaron and Christy Buskirk, and they also have a seasonal crew. Christy heads the flower side of the farm, but helps with all aspects and has been farming for almost 20 years. I will now turn it over to our first presenter, Emily, to talk about policy initiatives at OFA.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. As Jessica mentioned, we're going to talk a lot about sustainable agriculture and what that means. And before I get started, I'd just like to say a few words about the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association, or OFA. OFA has been working toward the purposes that Jessica mentioned for more than 45 years now. We do a lot of work educating beginning farmers, promoting access to land, providing on-demand, sustainable and organic agriculture education for farmers. We host the largest sustainable agriculture conference in Ohio. And as Jessica mentioned, we do a great deal of work on state and federal policy to promote sustainable agriculture. One thing that a lot of people don't know about OFA is that we are a USDA accredited organic certification agency. And what that means is we're authorized by USDA to do organic certification for organic farmers and food businesses in 12 states across the Midwest. So this is just a few of the things that I'm going to cover today. We've already done some introductions. I'll be doing a little bit of some landscape analysis, talking about some of the statistics, pieces about the land, the farmers on the land, how we compare nationally, and then some of the both policy opportunities and other opportunities for the future, after which I'll turn it over to Annie and then Christy. But, you know, a big question is, what does sustainable agriculture really mean? When I first started doing this work, the term that was used was sustainable agriculture. The National Organic Program came into effect about 25 years ago. But now we've got terms like regenerative, holistic. I would say ecological has been around for a long time. That's why it's in our name. But a simple way to think about sustainable agriculture is that it involves producing enough food and fiber to satisfy the needs of today without compromising the ability of future generations to do the same. Farmers and ranchers who value sustainability embrace three common goals while running productive operations. Profit over the long term, stewardship of our nation's land, air, and water, and quality of life for farmers, ranchers, farm employees, and our communities. So those are some of the real pillars of sustainability: social, environmental, and economic pillars. So this is the start, just to look at kind of where Ohio stands in some of our commodity and other types of production. You can see that we're pretty high in the top 10 for corn and soybean production. A lot of people don't know that we're the second largest egg producer in the United States, and we're right up there with the production of hogs, pigs, and milk as well. Food and agriculture are also a critical part of the Ohio economy. They contribute more than 400,000 jobs and $300 billion of value to the gross state product. So increases in productivity, you know, we've seen some increases in farm productivity. Unfortunately, that has sometimes led to decreased employment and decreased commodity prices. So the more and more we produce, sometimes the less and less farmers get paid because the prices go down. Apologize, these slides are moving very fast. So just a few more quick statistics here. We have 14 million acres of land in productive farming for the state. We've lost almost 4 million acres to development since 1970. And a great deal of land is owned by people who farm, more than 60%, but the rest of it is rented land. And one of the things that isn't on here is the great difficulty beginning farmers are having in accessing land. Access to land is the biggest barrier beginning farmers face. And it's important to mention that as the average age of farmers continues to climb. The average age is 58 right now. We are going to see millions of acres of farmland change hands in the next 10 years. And we really need to think critically about how to make sure that land stays viable for agricultural production and gets in the hands of next generation farmers who really want to farm. So over the past 20 years, adjusting for inflation, sales rose, but you can see by that statistic, the expenses increased more than the sales. Net cash income was almost zero in 2016, and that's broadly on a national scale. And it's risen very slowly since that time. But if you look, the people who do this kind of analysis, and you can see that the statistics on this page come from both Ohio State University as well as a study of the National Ag Statistics Service survey of agriculture that they do once every 5 years. So a lot of that income from farmers, especially those that are growing the larger commodity crops, comes from government farm program payments. So right now we have a farm crisis of debt related to major changes in the structure of agriculture. A few other notables are that, this is good news. We've got more producers on the land now. Ohio is top 10 in the nation. We're in the top 10 in the number of beginning farmers. But what we've seen over the past 20, 30 plus years is we've increasingly lost what's called the agriculture of the middle. We've got a lot of smaller farms and a very few number of incredibly large farms. But those kind of middle scale of agricultural operations that we think of as kind of icons of American agriculture have greatly disappeared because of farm crisis in the 1980s and continued difficulty in the ability of farmers to earn a living wage. The number of farmers that are looking to become certified organic is increased by almost 40%. And this is another really interesting statistic. We're 6th in the nation in the number of certified organic farms and 2nd only to California in the number of acres being transitioned to organic production. So it's very positive that we've got a large number of farmers that may be interested in organic, and even those who aren't interested in becoming certified are increasingly interested in learning about how they can protect soil health, be good stewards of the land and the water. So it's really important that we do everything we can to help farmers reach those goals. I have just a couple of slides in here related to the Farm Bill, and it's a good time to be talking with you all about this today because we're really in deep in the negotiations for the 2023 Farm Bill. Technically, our current Farm Bill, which was written in 2018, expires at the end of September. Now, in all likelihood, the new Farm Bill is probably not going to be done by then because Congress is still trying to figure out how to fund the government for the next year, but hopefully once they get that figured out, they'll turn their attention to completing the 2024 Farm Bill, either by the end of this year or early next. But why did we really start having a Farm Bill in the first place is a really important question. You know, it was during a period of the Dust Bowl, a time during the Great Depression, a time when farmers were getting such low commodity prices they could not survive. So that is why the very first Farm Bill was developed almost 100 years ago. Fast forward to today, and unfortunately, we're still seeing some of the same issues we were tackling back in the 1930s. The picture on your screen is of a car accident in Illinois just a few months ago. It was caused by a dust storm, and that's farm fields that had nothing growing, no cover crops, nothing but bare soil when a severe windstorm came in. It caused a major accident on the freeway involving 72 cars and resulting in people becoming hospitalized and dying as a result of that accident. So that's the kind of thing we need to stop if we're going to be promoting sustainable agriculture in the future. So what does this data tell us about Farm Bill, about agricultural sustainability? Farmers are paying more for inputs, they're making less income, and many of them are becoming larger and larger, which impacts the viability and the resilience of farming, but also has important implications for the social and environmental pillars of sustainability. This information also raises important questions for all of us about the impacts of these changes economically and for the health and future of Ohio's communities. One of the reports used for our brief landscape analysis from Ohio State University found that we now have a less diverse crop rotation, which is one of the most important strategies to mitigate climate change. Cover crops and long-term diverse crop rotations have the ability to sequester carbon in the soil, and carbon is definitely one of those greenhouse gases we want to minimize. What's sometimes less talked about is the role of nitrous oxide, which is a very potent greenhouse gas that comes from the use of synthetic fertilizers. So we need to think about many of these things as we move forward. And I just want to draw your attention to the chat. Jessica has put a few links in the chat. If you're interested in learning more about the Farm Bill, OFA's Farm Bill platform is accessible there, as well as a tracker where we're monitoring what are called marker bills. And those are things introduced that many people are trying to get into the final Farm Bill. The marker bills that we're tracking today definitely relate to sustainable agriculture. So that second link will take you directly to those bills we're tracking, along with tools that you can use to advocate if you'd like to see a more sustainable agriculture in Ohio and beyond. So then, this is just an analysis of where we're at. I'm sorry, let's see. Apologize for the very fast moving slides here. They're going a little fast. So you can see that we have, as I mentioned before, greenhouse gas sources that come from agriculture, the loss of soil organic matter and soil carbon, the synthetic inputs, and problems with concentrated animal feeding operations and food waste, which generate huge amounts of methane. So carbon, methane, and nitrous oxide are the three greenhouse gases that we seek to either eliminate or reduce. And what does this mean for farmers? You know, farmers, because if they're not in an ecological, holistic, sustainable system, there are problems related to both water management and water quality. Many farmers, because of heavy dependence on external synthetic inputs, have seen a real decrease in soil productivity. And those statistics have revealed the yield and income problems farmers have faced, along with tremendous increased risk with more frequent and extreme weather events. Finally, I'd say that, you know, many of us saw when we experienced the COVID-19 pandemic how fragile our food system can be. We had a shortage for a while of meat on grocery store shelves, along with a number of other items. That just illustrates that long supply chains can be disrupted. And there are many benefits to having what we would call a more distributed supply chain, which means farmers, like the two on our panel today, growing into local and regional food systems. So there are some important strategies. The Inflation Reduction Act was passed a little over a year ago and provides an unprecedented $20 billion for farm conservation practices specifically targeted to mitigate climate change. So that is something that is out there and is accessible now, and they're working to protect. There are those who want to cannibalize that funding, and we're working very hard to make sure that stays for climate-related farm conservation and supports holistic, synergistic, and systems-based approaches. So those are just the Farm Bill Opportunities box here is just listing a few of those marker bills that I told you about that you can check on our website. So just a quick summary there, we can see the negative impacts that industrial agriculture has had on our communities. But for all of those impacts and concerns, we can manifest a positive as well. Done right, agriculture can remediate the soil, protect and improve water quality and biodiversity. Good farming respects and enhances the health of the land, people, and the natural world. So in having this stewardship approach, we're caring for ourselves and we're caring also for our communities. So thank you so much. I look forward to any questions you might have, and I'm going to turn it over to our next panelist.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was great. I will now hand it over to Annie, who is going to cover sustainability at 80 Acres Farms. And I would just like to remind you that, again, at any point, feel free to go ahead and submit questions in the question pane.
Thank you, Jessica. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit, just briefly introduce myself, talk about 80 Acres, and really talk about how we approach sustainability at 80 Acres and give you some examples. So my name is Annie Westmeyer. I am our sustainability manager. I come from a background with engineering, and it's really a great background for sustainability because we at 80 Acres and in general really root ourselves in data for sustainability. So making sure we're measuring data, monitoring data is really important to us. And on a personal level, as said in my bio, it really resonates with me. I grew up in a blue-collar household, and the thought of sustainability, the thought of resource conservation, of energy efficiency, it really these were things that were taught to me as I was young. So it feels very natural to carry them through my career. And it's the right thing to do. And, I have a young family, and my goal was always to leave them, a better earth, a better globe than when I found it, and to be a part of that change in the positive way. So enough about me. 80 Acres is a vertical farming company. We were founded in 2015. We have over 300 employees in the US and in the Netherlands. The Netherlands have some of the great agriculture experts, so they were really critical to integrate into our team. We also have a collaboration with the Dutch team for our subsidiary Infinite Acres, which is our technology group. So sometimes you'll see us referred to as 80 Acres, sometimes you'll see Infinite Acres. We're all in one company, but we kind of have the tech wing. We have 4 production facilities in Ohio and Kentucky, and 1 on the way in Georgia. We have some great investors and partners and collaborators. You can see some logos here below. People really aligned with similar missions, whether that be from the investment side or partners. And we have a great retail outlet as well. We just announced recently that we are now in over 1,000 retail locations. So really excited to bring this produce to more and more people. This is a little bit of a credence for our company of what we believe. So we believe that food should taste great. That's really important. You want people to enjoy what they're eating. That we believe food should be grown where people are year round, should be wholesome, nutritious, free from pesticides, herbicides, and that feeding people does not have to endanger our environment or deplete our natural resources. The next slide here really takes that a step further, and I think Amelie really outlined a lot of these problems and opportunities. So it just shows that a lot of people in agriculture are thinking about a lot of these challenges and concerns, and we're coming to the table with many solutions, and that's really important to having a sustainable food system in the future. So things like growth, urbanization, food miles, food security, food waste, these are all really, really important challenges that we need to address, and we're here to help with that. We've also addressed already today, there's a lot of ever changing and adding challenges between droughts, floods, heat waves, pests, land degradation, fresh water shortages, fertilizer shortages. We talked about supply chain shortages. Some fertilizers affected there. So it's not an easy system to manage these days. So we need many solutions again to address this. And our founders wanted to find a new way to feed communities. They were a part of the produce industry, and they knew there had to be a better way to deliver food to people, and again, to add to that food system. And so 80 Acres was born. And this is an outline of our sustainability strategy. We really resonate with some SDGs as shown below. And then these are our 4 sustainability pillars that came out of a lot of discussions and collaboration. So how we grow is really a lot of our operations. It's our day-to-day. It's managing our water use, reducing our waste, all those type of things that happen in our facilities. We have product and packaging. So our packaging, we want to make sure that it maintains our product freshness and that premium quality, so it lasts and tastes great in your refrigerator as a consumer. But we also are always looking for new packaging opportunities that can help us bring a more sustainable package to our consumers without sacrificing that product quality and freshness. So there's always a balance to be had there. Community and engagement. So we really believe that we are members of the community where our farms are, where we are. So you can see this photo here. We do have a lot of events with schools or at the COSI Museum. So teaching our youth about where your food comes from, how does lettuce grow? We have some great demonstration units that can really depict that and teach children, and then also teach them about vertical farming as well. We also donate into our local food networks. We really believe that fresh food should be available to all people. So we have some great partners, people like Last Mile Food, JEE. So there's a lot of great organizations to help us get food into many hands. And then farm infrastructure. So we are constantly increasing our efficiency and looking for ways to do more with less, right? We also grow with renewable energy, so we're always trying to look for opportunities there, but really making sure that we are responsible and ever improving that farm infrastructure. And some more detailed examples of these pillars, because I think examples are worth 1,000 words, right? And some photos here. Packaging. So I talked about making those sustainable choices while balancing product quality. So we did a commercialization of strawberries for a period of time, and we used a novel paperboard package with a resealable film lid. And it was a really great example of us trying a new package out, testing it out, seeing how consumers liked it, how they felt. And it was a little bit more curbside or recycle friendly. So it was a great way to test a new package, and our team really believes in being on that early adopter edge of new packaging and testing it out and learning it and taking those learnings back to our team. But it's really a strategic balance. So we want to make sure, again, that sustainability of the material doesn't sacrifice product quality for our consumers. So it's a very challenging balance to walk, but we really believe in trying and investigating what we can. Being part of our local food networks, I discussed our donation. Another example of this is we have a collaboration with the Ohio Association of Food Banks to help us increase the availability of produce at its member locations. And this is huge. Those type of organizations are always grateful to see produce. It's always hard to get good produce into those hands. So this collaboration allows us to get that to them. Again, making sure all members of our community have produce available. And adaptive reuse. One really neat feature of vertical farming is we can grow food almost anywhere. So the photos you see here are a before and after of our facility that grows tomatoes. So you can see the before photo. I don't think I need to tell you which one, but you can see how much the building revitalized, also working to make sure that new design and renovation is efficient, while also providing local jobs and locally grown food in the community. So it's a really great example. We also have our great partners like Siemens who can help us ensure those efficiencies and continue driving those in both our brownfield or reuse sites and any new design sites. So making sure we're incorporating all those methods and techniques in every design we make. And some impact. So by our style of growing, we were able to reduce trucking miles of food, water use, and food waste. A lot of these things being driven by being close to our consumers. But we're really proud of our impact from our production means. And a little bit more about why 80 acres. So vertical farming is a fairly young industry, but there is a sense of leadership and an intentional method of doing things differently. So an example of this is the vertical farming identity and manifesto statement. A number of organizations got together in a pretty competitive fashion to outline our identity and things like doing science-based targets, doing SDGs, putting in the continuous improvement style framework as an identity statement, I think really shows the importance of these things to our organization. So many of us in this field are invested in doing the right thing, the sustainable thing. And some of these are hard and they take a lot of effort and input energy, so to speak, but we believe they're the right thing to do. We also have a number of stakeholders aligned with our sustainable focus. So whether that be investors or other partners who have very similar missions and goals, we're really proud and excited to have those people alongside us as we grow and evolve. And beyond the basics, so we have tested many different things. So you can see some strawberries, blackberries, various tomatoes, peppers, there's been cucumbers. So there are many things that we're working on or have worked on. There's a lot of great potential for vertical farming. And hopefully one day you'll see more and more 80 acres. We also just launched our salad kits recently. They are delicious. If you are a salad lover, they're a great option and a really great way to spice up your lunchbox there. But that is all I have for you guys today.
Thank you, Annie. And last but not least, we will hear from Christy about operations over at Clay Hill Produce and Flowers.
Okay, let me just get, are you guys able to see my slides? I don't know if I'm,
Christy, if you'll go ahead and click one with your mouse, that should.
yeah, I can't. Okay, here we go. All right, great, thank you. Okay, so you guys have heard some great presentations outlining a lot of the similar information I'm going to go over. I threw in some like pretty dry explanations here. I think Emily went over it very well in the beginning, but basically I'm just going to go over some of the basic tenets of organic ag just very briefly, and then some of the stuff with regenerative agriculture, and then I'm going to get into how we address those here at Clay Hill. So Emily went over it, and I liked her description. She said, producing enough food and fiber today while not compromising the future. The definition I put in here was one I just pulled right off the website about what the Organic Foods Production Act, when it was created, sort of what they outlined there. And as I said, it's a little dry here. But that they mentioned it's a production system that responds to site-specific conditions by integrating culture, biological, and mechanical processes that foster recycling of resources, promotes ecological balance, and conserves biological diversity. And down at the bottom, there's some of like the big parts of that I think when people think of organic, they will think of some of these things like you're not allowed to use GMO in organic systems. You are not allowed to, I think most people would generalize sprays as one category, but it's persistent pesticides, chemicals, or sprays. You are allowed to use sprays, but they have to be on the approved list. No synthetic fertilizers, sewage sludge, no antibiotics, hormones, and then some of the goals through these systems is to protect wildlife, promote biodiversity. And since basically farms are all soil, we are also trying to enhance our fertility through cover cropping, crop rotation. And then the bottom thing is that it is regulated by by federal law. I don't claim to know a ton about regenerative agriculture. As Emily mentioned, a lot of these terms get thrown around a lot, right? Like there's a lot of emphasis on different systems. Also, the term even sustainability is something that is used in lots of different ways. When I started looking into how people would define this, like I can tell you how I would define it or how it manifests on my farm, but they talked about this a lot as being like a, more of a philosophy than an exact system. You know, really having goals in it. It's not specific things. Like I think when we talk about, the organic certification that is overseen by the government, you have to have rules that then govern that. This is like a philosophy, so you won't have a specific rule because every farm is different, right? And these are facts that have been used by indigenous communities since the beginning. So it is a borrowing of a lot of philosophies and the ways we view the land from systems that have existed and people that have had it figured out. So some of these main tenets that I saw listed on there are low to zero tillage. You know, some of these are the same, use of cover crops, a lot of it related to living systems with animals. You know, I am an organic farm. We grow produce and cut flowers. I don't have animals on here, but you know, that is systems. A lot of regenerative agriculture is around animal systems, use of compost, increasing biodiversity on site or your max crop diversity instead of monocropping. And workers' rights plays into this. I know that Emily also mentioned, you know, there is a social, the three pillars. One is social, workers' rights and fair pay, and the use of perennial crops. So getting into my story, so those are some of the tenets that drive how we farm here. I have a degree in landscape architecture. I went to school for that. All of my projects evolved around environmental themes, recycling, native plants, environmental education centers. That's just always been a focus. I got a permaculture design certificate. I volunteered on natural building farms. So this has also always just been an interest of mine. I met my husband. We both decided we wanted to farm, and my husband's family has land here in Ohio. We're outside of Tiffin. So we took over the family farm 10 years ago. We started transitioning the land. It was in conventional ag. His uncle was farming it in traditional grain crops. We started transitioning it. We started in our 9th season. So we weren't able to be certified the first year. The certification process takes 36 months from the last applied prohibitive substance, which would be on the list of some of those, persistent chemicals, even the GMO crops he was using. So it took 36 months. So we were able to be certified in our 2nd season and make that claim at our farmers markets to our customers. We manage 30 tillable acres, and we actively farm about 10 acres a season. We were having trouble managing everything based upon the equipment we had. So we recently did ask some neighbors for help. We are very lucky. We have a certified organic farm down the road from us. We asked if they wanted a little bit more land to grow some crops on. So they now have taken over helping us manage some of it because we had about 20 acres that we had in cover crops and needed mowed that we were having a hard time getting to with our equipment. So we have found a solution to that. As I mentioned, we do all sorts of produce and cut flowers, which is sort of the division I head up. And as she mentioned in our bio, we sell directly to consumers, mainly through farmers markets, and I sell some add-ons to some other well-established CSAs. And this year we have done a little bit of wholesale with an account through the Ohio Food Bank. So that has been really rewarding and a big learning process for us about how to grow more food and get it off the farm into the hands of more people. It is my husband and I, and we have a seasonal crew of 5 people or more. And here they are. Here we all are as a crew picture we took. And then, so all these pictures I have from my farm, I tried to supplement what I'd be talking about with actual pictures from our stuff. So there we are digging some sweet potatoes. So of these tenants I talked about, I'm going to dip into each one of these topics about how we manage our land, which had cover cropping, how we manage our fertility, pest control, weed control, water use, how we're thinking about and adapting to climate change, and then a little bit about our sales. So for land management, I mentioned that we actually own 50 acres. Some of it is forest. But when we first got here, Aaron's uncle, that's my husband, told us, not all land can be produce land. He was farming crops on this, and because the nature of grain farming was able to make it work, but we definitely were not going to able to make it work for produce, annual produce vegetable production, which uses tillage, and you're having crops in there every season. We had a lot of wetland, land that was marginal. Right off the bat, we went down to the NRCS. We decided to take some of our acreage just straight up out of production and put it into conservation. This created habitat for some species around here. We seeded, ours was through the Pheasants Forever program, which is habitat for birds. So that does kind of determine the species palette that you should plant in ours. And you can see this picture here. There's some asters up front, goldenrod, which grows freely everywhere. And then in the background, we have some big blue stem and Indian grass. We have a lot of coreopsis and echinacea, rudbeckia. And because I am a flower farmer, not only are we creating more habitat for native plants and animals and just not messing with land that doesn't need to be growing crops that I grow, it's presented some interesting forage opportunities for my flower business. I think I mentioned I studied landscape architecture. I did work for the Park Service for a little bit and did some native seed harvest. And so I never harvest more than 10% of my land, but I do take some grasses out for some fall arrangements. And when they're all dried up, there's some interesting foliage that I take out to add to my arrangements. So that's been kind of a fun revelation about how to use that land in more than one way. And then below that is crop rotation. So one of our main tenets of land management to help manage disease and pest pressure is just switching your crops around. You know, the monocropping here, some of the reasons why chemicals need to be used is because when you get pest pressure on a lot of stuff, it's a lot of risk to mitigate. So here we mitigate some of that by having different crops. We have an elaborate mapping system, and every year, you know, need to plan this out. This determines where you're using your cover crops. I list, you know, it combats weed and pest pressure. And then different crops can utilize different nutrients in the soil. I have to admit, like, I don't know how to get into that level of planning on our farm, but I know for our plant families, we just rotate everything around and try to get new stuff in. Annual vegetable production farms use a lot of stuff in the brassica family. It can be hard to get proper crop rotation, but we do our best here. And right here is a little map of our farm that I pulled off of Google Maps, and I outlined all of our CRP land on the back part there. You can see it hugs the woods. There was a lot of animal pressure and it just laid really wet. So all of that is in native grasses, and then we extended it on our neighbor's property there as a buffer organic. The organic systems plan requires that you have at least a 30-foot buffer. So we decided to go ahead and put that into native plants. And there's plums in there and persimmons and all sorts of cool stuff that we were able to incorporate in. Then you can see my house is connected to my barn up at the top, and you can see in this photograph, I'll get into that a little bit later, but some of our high tunnels. So part of the land management and ways that we manage our fertility around here are in cover cropping. Cover crops are a standard tool in organic systems. Some conventional farms totally use them now that there's some emphasis and especially money on protecting the lake. I noticed some farms up where I am in Northern Ohio using some more cover crops when the ground is fallow, which is really cool. They help reduce erosion. In this picture here, I just went to the Rural King and got a bunch of bird seed, and we did a couple different crop stuff with just some sunflower seeds as a placeholder here when we didn't have anything in here. You can see in some of the bullet points, it adds organic matter, it adds nutrients. One of my mentors told me once, you know, biodiversity above ground is biodiversity underground. It can scavenge nutrients and hold them so there's not runoff. So the materials will use this, and as you break them down and then plant your next crop in it, you know, those nutrients are shared. That is especially true with legumes. You know, that is one of the main things you want to have in your systems, that is capturing some nitrogen for you, which reduces your fertility use. And again, down at the bottom, I do forage some of this stuff. Those are not the right type of sunflowers for me to use in my cut flower business, but I can use some crops for foraging. Some sorghums produce some cool seed heads. And oh, you can see here on the right there is some big blue stem I foraged. I use that in some of my winter arrangements. And then on the left-hand side here is a list of a bunch of the different crops that I had in one of my plots, just sun hemp and oats and tillage radish. And that picture is of a field pea. And again, a pea is a legume that will be fixing some of the nitrogen for us to use in the next year. So that dovetails into fertility. Cover crops can help with that, reducing your need for a lot of fertilizer. This is determined with soil testing. We soil test every single year. This is also part of our certification process to determine exactly what our soil needs. Again, the cover crops. We are very lucky. We have a big composting facility up here in Northern Ohio. And a bit of this farming, I think, in some of those descriptions, it is like a site-specific, location-specific needs. Like not every farm's going to have the resources that my farm has, and not every farm has the same soil type or access to things. So we are lucky. We have a certified organic compost source very close to here. Trucking can be very expensive for this, but we're able to bring in a bunch of compost. Now, I mainly use that in my high tunnels. You do have to be careful with manure-based stuff and salt buildups, but we do use this in our high tunnels a lot, and I'm very grateful to have that. And then we also have quite a few companies here. I use Ohio Earth Food, and I buy a lot of stuff from them. I do use some fertilizers, a granulated fertilizer, and we do spray some stuff on foliar. it is just the necessity to produce, you know, high value crops that don't have any pest pressure on them and, you know, look yellow. So we're lucky to have access to that pretty close too. So here's some photos about pest control. As I mentioned, there's sprays you can use in organics. They tend to be more biological in nature. What comes to mind is, say, like BT that you would use on a corn or really any sort of worm. You know, BT attacks a worm system. It makes it so that it can't digest, and essentially it starves to death. You know, that is not something that is going to affect like a beneficial insect. Now, there are some sprays that aren't species specific that you can use in organics, but most of them are more a biological that you spray specifically. On the left-hand side, you can see I have some bags on my dahlias in that picture. That's what I would call exclusion. The bugs just actually cannot get through it to it. That is pretty labor intensive for the flowers, but that's a pretty high value item. I think in the upper picture, you can see along the right-hand side there some row cover. And that is also an exclusion that we use, especially in the spring, to keep out flea beetles and some cucumber beetles that you just literally cover the plants with to keep pests out. And then in the lower corner, there is a ladybug. I buy in beneficial insects, especially for my greenhouses. We get a lot of aphid buildup in there at times of the year, and they are very helpful for helping us control that. So you can tell there's a bunch of options that we have in our toolkit for the organic farmer. A couple different methods of weed control. There are mulches. There is a lot of plastic used on organic farms. Unfortunately, it's sort of, I think they call it one of the dirty secrets. We are trying to reduce our plastic use here, but it really is a whole systems management. So we have to use plastic for some of our longer term crops right now to make sure that they can follow through and make us the money we need to stay in business. In this picture here is a very old G tractor. We got that a couple years ago. We've been adding tools onto it to help us with our mechanical cultivation. I have not gone into too many of the cons, because if people are like, why doesn't everybody farm this way? Some of the cons are just getting all the tools that you need in line and building your systems so that they work for you. We have found that, you know, if you don't do proper bed formation, then you can't use the proper tools to kill the weeds on it if the surface is uneven or the beds are at an angle or maybe things aren't straight. So as you build, as with any system, you know, you have to build all of the tools together. And so it's not that any of it is, let's say, hard. It's just something that you need to learn about and make sure that you build step by step so that one thing builds on the other one. Other mulches that we've used include straw. Again, you're lucky to have that as a resource up here. Straw does not need to be certified organic, but they want to make sure you're getting it from a place that is not sprayed down a whole field. Sometimes I guess they do that with weed killer to kill it. Most farmers here, you know, take their crop off and it dries naturally. So I have access to straw up here. And then there's some stuff with living mulches we've done where you can plant the aisles with different types of clover or different grasses that grow pretty low. So you have some control in your aisles and other spaces. So this is a big field. This is one of the fields we grew for the food bank this year. It was a bunch of Roma tomatoes. So you can see we did lay the plastic mulch and then we mulched the aisles with some straw we were able to secure from another farmer. It's actually rye straw. Another pillar of the organic system, you know, is proper water usage and management. Here you can see we use these misters. Drip tape is a very good option. That is very little water loss. That is very beneficial. It's very good under plastic, but it's good in desert environments where you might get a lot of evaporation. Drip in open fields is very hard because then you can't really do mechanical cultivation. So it's one of those things that if you want to do weed killing with machines because you don't want to use plastic, you have to think about how you're going to water. So this system here, these misters, they do about a block of ours at a time. We can get about 8 beds with this system, and then that way we can use the tractor to kill more weeds and use less plastic. We probably lose a little bit of water to evaporation, but again, this system has worked pretty well for us for building the other systems that we want with the weeds. How are we adapting to climate change? It is definitely something we are feeling. We get worse storms sometimes. We have invested in quite a few high tunnels at this point. You can see in the lower left there my very sad map I drew with the limited tools I had on my computer. We are up to 5 covered structures on my farm. One of them is a greenhouse. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, and then we have 5 more tunnels that we're growing under. This is really great, mostly for season extension, but for really high value items, like growing some tomatoes. You know, we had a storm this year where we got 5 inches of rain in like a day, you know, and that can be very hard on a farm, especially late in the season when there's already kind of like fungal disease buildup. You know, it took a lot of crops down. I know a lot of farmers that had a hard time with it, getting hailstorms, windstorms. So a lot of covered spaces that we're adding. You know, if you have good soil health and you have good friability and you have good organic matter, it does lead to resilient systems. So you can hold moisture better, you can move moisture better. This focus on organic systems and building soil health does create better resilience. And again, the site management component on the bottom, where you're taking marginal land out of cultivation, land that maybe just should not be farmed for produce production, and managing it in other ways. And again, I mentioned that I had studied permaculture. A big tenet of that is moving water around naturally, so building swales to move water or other water management tools. So again, sales, we were talking about, you know, sustainable is maybe not shipping your product all over. When we started our farm, we always had the intention that we wanted to feed our community. I did not mention that I'm actually an East Coaster originally. I grew up in New Jersey. I worked on many farms there that had amazing farmers markets and access to huge sales outlets very close. When we moved to rural Ohio, that was different. That was a challenge. This idea of hyper local or feeding our community does become harder when you live rurally and maybe your neighbors all have farms or access to food, whether through relatives or it's just different. So that was a little bit of a wake up call about how are we going to sell our food and make enough. So we do go to farmers markets. We go to 3 farmers markets. In Toledo, Bowling Green, and then Tiffin has a farmers market. And I have never been interested in hosting my own CSA, but there are a couple very strong CSAs in my area, and we have been able to piggyback with them and offer mainly cut flowers to their customers as a way for them to diversify their sales, which is the direction a lot of CSAs have gone. But some of the problems with this direct-to-consumer stuff is we have a lot of issues with weather. It can be very hot at times of the growing season, over 90 degrees. You do not get many people out in an evening farmer's market. You know, I listed there no guaranteed sales. And then you have long hours at the market where potentially you're not doing very much while you're waiting for a sale. We had one market that was like an 8-hour market. And then when you get there and set up, you know, that's lots of time that you could be back at the farm, maybe getting work done. So what we did this year with that wholesale account with the food bank was kind of pilot being able to do some wholesale stuff. So that is a guaranteed sale every week. That is a little bit more infrastructure than we had. You have to, you know, maybe move pallets of food around, which means maybe you need a forklift or on a tractor. You have to have a cooler that maybe has a roll-up door where you can move pallets in and out of. So all of these steps and all of these methodologies with the farming, I was asked recently, can we just convert all farms to organic? Like, no, you know, every system has its steps. So the wholesale, this has been a great steps towards eliminating. We want to get our food in our customers' hands as close by as we can. And the wholesale channel with the food bank has been a great learning opportunity for us to be able to do that and reduce food miles for people within Ohio to get access to all the agriculture that happens here. So I just wanted to end with this quote that I'm sure everybody has heard, you know, the 7th generation principle based on the, I'm not going to try to say that, the Iroquois philosophy that the decisions we make today should result in a sustainable world 7 generations into the future. True sustainability thinking very far in the future. And then I have my information over there if anybody has any questions for me or wants to get in touch about anything.
Thanks, Christy. We're going to go ahead and move on to our question and answer portion of today's presentation. But Christy, I wanted to go ahead and hop in with what I think is a really interesting question that each of you might be able to touch on. I know a lot of people, like you said, are interested in the conversion of conventional, like large-scale farming over to smaller, organic, sustainable farms. And can we just do a little roundtable discussion about how that yield differential might be impacted by organic and sustainable farming? Like, would it be able to produce as much as we need, et cetera?
I'd be happy to get it. Oh, go ahead, Christy, you start.
Okay, I was just going to say very quickly, Annie touched base on this about food waste, and there is kind of a difference between produce and grain. What comes to the top of my head is that there is a lot of food waste here. So this idea that we wouldn't have enough food, I actually think we produce a ton of food. It doesn't get used always efficiently. And then I know a lot of the grain in this state gets used to feed animals. So I think there's a little bit of like a culture shift that needs to happen. And I think there can be a reduction of yields, which does affect the price of stuff, but I don't think that is a reason not to do it and not to explore it. I'm sure Emily will have a more detailed answer, but I know on our farm, we produce a lot of food on a very small acreage. Our amount that we earn on, a small acreage is a lot more than grain farmers around us. And again, I talked a lot about land management and how we manage land here and making sure land that is very productive is used to produce food that people eat. I think is a way that we can restructure, like the way we talked about it. Can we go from the system that we have now and just shift it to this other thing that might not work, but there's a lot more ways that we can think about it.
This is Emily. I would just say, Christy, you hit some of the most critical points head on, is that a lot of the land in agriculture does not grow food. It grows feed, feed for animals, sometimes feed for ethanol. So, this idea that we don't produce enough food or that scarcity mentality isn't always correct. We technically do produce enough food right now to feed the world, but there is a lot of waste and there's a lot of inequitable distribution of food. So I think the focus really is on agriculture, feeding and supporting our communities. But I would say when it comes to what Jessica brought up, which is often referred to as the yield gap, if you're not using like a synthetic, if you're using a synthetic pesticide, it's kind of like you get an instant result. If you're using systems level approaches, like the kind that Christy mentioned that she uses, this is a pretty management intensive system. You have to have things working in place and you need to have healthy soil. But the good news is that, number one, we're investing more in organic and sustainable research, and that research can help resolve some of the challenges that have been there for organic and sustainable farmers in the past, primarily around weed control. Controlling weeds without using poison, basically, has been a challenge. So the more money we can invest into organic and sustainable research will help us to deal with weed pressure problems in sustainable and organic systems. And there is no one size fits all. I mean, different systems, as Christy mentioned, may be useful in different communities and in different environments. And I think we need to think, instead of like one or the other, like what are the systems that work best for this community, with this soil type, this location, and what our needs are. And I'm happy to turn it over to Annie for any input you have, Annie.
I really resonate with what you said there at the end. I think there's going to be many solutions needed in the future to help, feed our population. And I think, you outlined it really well. There's going to be many solutions for all the different products and categories in areas of land. So I think both of what you and Christy said is absolutely correct. Many solutions are needed, and one size fits all rarely works well, right? So many things are needed for the future.
Thank you to you all. Next up, I have a question specifically for Annie. There was a question that brought up concerns about the energy intensity of vertical farming and how that might be seen as sustainable.
Absolutely. So we do use renewable energy in our farms, and we do many things under one roof, which are typically spread out. So we seed, grow, harvest, package, and ship all under one roof. So we're compressing a traditionally longer supply chain that's energy intensive into a single building. So we look kind of holistically at that food system. And again, as I mentioned, we have a lot of great collaborators to help us improve that efficiency. We're driving our efficiency gains every single day to make what we do more and more efficient.
Awesome, thank you so much. We had a question specifically come in for Christy about the 30-foot buffer. And this attendee was curious as to if that is a federal rule or a state rule.
That is a federal rule, and I hope I'm quoting that right. I can't remember. Maybe Emily, you can confirm this or not, but oh, it's a site-specific determination. I know you have to have a buffer on your farm, and a lot of farms around here have maybe woods as a natural buffer, roads, you know, that is something that you need to be buffered from as well. And definitely, you know, my farm does touch up next to other conventional farms. So Emily did right, it is a site-specific determination. In my memory, we were asked to prove that we had at least 30 feet around parts of our farm here.
Thanks, Christy. Yeah, I mean, it is a little bit dependent on, you know, if you're next to a natural reserve, maybe your buffer might not have to be as large. But if you are next to farms that are using, you know, synthetic chemicals or genetically engineered crops, you might need a little bit more of a buffer. So that's why it gives producers a little bit of flexibility for what makes sense for their operation.
Great, thank you for that clarification. We had a question that asks, what can be done to get more small and medium-sized organic farms providing fresh produce directly to our local grocery stores? So that might be a question for all of you. I'm not sure who would like to jump in first.
I can speak to my experience with that. So this is, I love all these questions. I feel like this is like myself maybe 20 years ago when I got started farming, and I'm like, I'm going to feed my community and be in the grocery store. I was part of a co-op. We sold to Whole Foods and some grocery stores. Now they are all overseen differently. A place like Whole Foods has to have a chain of accountability. You have to have a food certification, a food safety. Now I can't remember, GAP. The GAP might be the basic one, but a lot of grocery stores, especially larger chains, want to make sure that they are not going to get in trouble if there's food that gets sold that makes people sick. And so that chain of accountability comes down to certifications that farms can get. Like meat industry has been highly regulated for a very long time. And produce farms are just really within the past, I would say, I don't know, 5 to 10 years also having to come under this umbrella. My farm did go through this process. It is in the beginning, it wasn't too hard, but it is another layer of certification that you need, that you have to pay for. Somebody has to come here, you write up a big plan, you have to follow systems. And some of them, I would say, felt very cumbersome for a small farm. And there are price limits on some of this about how in depth you have to go with it, but some stuff can be quite hard with the amount of cleaning or some things that have to happen on a farm to fall under this. Now, there are local places that will sell our food without having to have that, but getting into some place like Kroger or Whole Foods is a chain of responsibility that you have to provide to them so that they know, you know, they will not get in trouble for people getting sick. I mean, there have been major recalls on food in the country, as we all know, in the past few years. So if anyone wants to add to that, that's been our experience.
And I don't know if you can speak to this more, Christy, but what we've heard from a lot of growers is that sometimes selling into a large retailer like a Kroger, they're not going to give a small farmer the kind of price for their product that is going to pay a living wage. And so, you know, sometimes being able to sell as Christy does, direct at a farmer's market or through a CSA, is going to ultimately pay more of a fair pay price for the small to mid-scale farmer. I don't know if either Annie or Christy can expound upon that.
Again, this is Christy. The wholesale that we have taken part in was mainly to Whole Foods, and they actually provided a pretty good price. So that was a very good relationship that we had with them. And then this other food bank pot of money, that was another wholesale. Now that's not a grocery store, but it is another wholesale account, which is, you know, similar economics behind it, is an incentive program for smaller growers, organic growers, and minority growers. So that is also something that had a little bit of a price boost in it. So those have all been great opportunities for us as a small farm. I do not have any experience with the prices, but I would imagine what you're saying, Emily, is true, because you are competing with very large growers that hit very low price points.
Great. And Annie, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that question?
Nothing to add.
Okay, great. Next up, Annie, this one is specifically for you. Someone asked, what is the biggest barrier to growth and reach in vertical farming operations?
It's a great question. So vertical farming 5 to 10 years ago, its potential really became clear. There was a lot of money raised and people promised things that they couldn't deliver. And we're seeing some of that fall out now. But to be successful in vertical farming or any farming, I think Christy and Amelie have really spoken to these things. There's many things to balance. You have to grow efficiently, operate efficiently, at the right cost, deliver to your consumers, and deliver on your promises. So it's a capital intensive industry and there's not a lot of room for error. But we're building our sustainable business with the right partners. Like I said, we have a lot of great collaborators to help us along this journey. And our newest farm, which opened last week, is already sold out. So the demand we're seeing is real, and we're able to scale it up with the right unit economics.
Great, thank you. Christy, I'm not sure if you would like to touch on the same question. I know that you mentioned that you had too much land for the staff that you currently had, but is there any interest in growing and expanding the reach of your facility?
Yeah, yes. I mean, you touched on two things. Staffing is really hard. And then, as Annie mentioned, it's very capital heavy. So we do have to invest in some equipment. I'm not opposed to it, but we have had trouble thus far with finding staff that can come back and support it. So it's not that we're disinterested, but yeah, as of right now, we are at a sweet spot for what our markets can handle and what we can handle.
Sure, totally understand. Next up, we have a question that can be for any of you. Maybe Emily might be most familiar. The question is, are any of you familiar with connections being made between animal agriculture farmers and crop farmers to utilize cattle manure for nutrients and to restore soil health?
I think is building on what Christy said earlier, the regenerative agricultural movement is really looking at that interaction between livestock and land. But for them, I think it's more than just using the manure. There are some folks, including Ellen Savory, who has studied for decades the beneficial aspects of having livestock in the land, not just for the nutrients they provide, but even for how, you know, their presence on the land can kind of break up the land, can help make sure there are other beneficials that grow on the land. And it's interesting because someone who is both an agricultural professional, a farmer, a poet, and a writer, and some of you may know Wendell Berry, he often says that in agriculture we took an elegant solution, which is livestock on the land, fertilizing prairies and land grown for livestock and fruit production, and divided it into two distinct problems so that we have these large livestock facilities that generate more waste that can be used. So, you know, most of the farmers I'm familiar with, I think, that use manure, use poultry litter more so than from large livestock, but that may be the case. I know there are different ways that people are looking at, you know, potentially processing large livestock waste, but, you know, you can call it, you know, generating ethanol from methane, but I think any way you slice it, it's factory farm gas. It's encouraging keeping animals in a confined space where they have no access to soil and fresh air, and it's kind of like the antithesis of sustainable agriculture. So I'll pass it on to whoever else wants to answer that one.
Okay, that sounds like we are good on that answer, unless Annie or Christy, you want to cut me off, but I'll go ahead and start asking the next question. During the peak of the pandemic, a lot of people began picking up new hobbies like gardening, so it saw an increase in people starting their own gardens or participating in local community gardens. Do you all foresee this being another piece of the puzzle in connecting like more local food into the food chain, reducing the demand on these smaller farms, maybe getting us away from some of these larger farming facilities? What are your thoughts on these home gardens and community gardens?
This is Christy. I'll just say I think more people gardening is amazing. More people putting food in the ground, more people getting connected to their food is important. I have heard that a lot as well. We started selling a lot of plants at our farmers market. It is so delightful to hear my customers come and tell me what they're growing and how they're harvesting it. Do I think this can close a food gap or provide anything? Like, I mean, maybe a little bit, but especially in the climate where we live, like you really can only produce food outside like half of the year at most. So there's still a lot of food that people need at other times of the year in a lot of the country, and some other problems that will come up. And I think a lot of people typically feel overwhelmed or will give it up. But I think overall, people getting connected to their food and growing this is an amazing first step. And the more places we can have people growing food, the better. I feel like it is all additive. Annie had mentioned there's like so many solutions to some of these problems, whether it's growing indoors or outside or in these gardens. Like, yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, I'd agree with Christy. I think that the more people can have their hands in the soil, the more they grow things, the more they can have an appreciation for the work that farmers do every day, and want to ensure that farmers do get a fair pay price and can make a good livelihood in the future. And I would also say that, you know, there is, you know, doing that work, having your hands in the soil, doing that community garden will connect us. It connects us to the earth, to history, to culture, and each other. So if we don't have those connections to the land, we lose appreciation and respect for the people who produce, process, and prepare our food.
Well said, Emily. Thank you. Next up, a question just for Christy, real fast. Somebody is asking if you can mention again who you use for your compost.
I don't know if I mentioned who it was. It is called Universal Farms. and they are up here, like in the Fremont area in Northern Ohio. Also up here, we have Herzl Farms, which is, they have a certified organic component to their farm. I don't know off the top of my head if their compost is certified, but Universal Farms is who I use, and Herzl's Farm, HIRZEL, is also another place kind of close up here.
Thank you. And then I think we'll have time for about one more question. We'll take this one about the Real Organic Project. It asks if any of you are familiar with what the Real Organic Project is, and if so, if you could please explain to us, the audience, the objectives of the project.
I'll try to take that one and certainly welcome anybody else's input. There are a number of different kind of what we call add-on certifications. You know, we at OFA really see organic as kind of a fundamental certification program, because it is the only kind of voluntary regulatory program with oversight from the USDA. You know, farmers, an important thing to know about certified farmers is that they submit something called an organic systems plan. They have to submit any inputs they use, where they get their seeds, just a whole slew of data about their farming operation every single year. That gets reviewed by a couple of people, and then an inspector goes out to the farm every single year with that organic systems plan to verify that what's on there is in fact what's happening on the farm. So there's a tremendous amount of oversight with organic certification, but there are some kind of additional add-on certifications. The Real Organic Project is a recent one. And some of the things that spurred the growth of the Real Organic Project was, you know, they argue that some, you know, USDA does certify some farms that allow confinement dairy operations to be certified. And they believe that cows should be raised on pasture. The USDA also certifies eggs from chickens who have never been outside, and they believe that chickens should be raised on pasture. And also the National Organic Program regulations make several references to the soil, to site-specific conditions, and protecting the health of the soil. So that they don't believe that hydroponic operations should be certified organic. So, you know, what we're hoping is that a couple of these problems will be resolved very soon, specifically around livestock. The allowance for chickens to be kept in these large poultry barns, some of the operators have what they call a porch, which could be a concrete patio with a little fence. And those chickens don't have to go outside at all. They just have to have access to the outdoors. And so they may leave a door open where an animal could go out on a little piece of concrete and a fence. But if an animal has never been outdoors, they probably don't even kind of know what the outdoors is. So there is a rule called the Organic Livestock and Poultry Practices Standard. That is a rule we have been working on for more than 10 years. It's in the final stages at USDA right now, and it would codify what are animal welfare standards for organic agriculture, and that would prevent, you know, confinement operations for livestock to be allowed to be certified organic. I would also say, and OFA does work with the Real Organic Project, we also are the only certifier in the country that certifies to another standard, which is called the Agricultural Justice Project. There is a food justice certification, which deals with providing fair for everybody who labors from field to table. So it takes into consideration how farm workers are treated, the things that farm workers are exposed to, trying to make sure they have, you know, just safe conditions, fair labor standards, and to help farmers to work together to create systems that provide a good workplace for farm workers as well. So those are the couple of the kind of add-on certifications, one of which you just referred to, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Emily. That is all the time we have for questions right now. If you do come up with a question, feel free to reach out to any of our speakers after our session ends, and they would be happy to get back to you and answer your questions. So I would just like to thank our presenters again for joining us today, and thank you to our audience members for taking the time to be here. We appreciate you joining for all of our conference sessions. And like I mentioned, this is the last session of our 2023 Sustainability Conference. But before you log off, I just want to remind you of a couple of programs that the Recycling and Sustainability Unit at Ohio EPA offers. First up, our Recycling and Litter Prevention Grants are our yearly recycling grant program that supports communities, nonprofits, businesses, and schools to initiate or expand recycling programs, encourage sustainable practices, stimulate economic growth, and support litter prevention. Those applications are online and open on October 2nd. Also on October 2nd, you can view an informational webinar about those grants. You can find more information about the grant program and the webinar at recycleohio.gov. And then last but not least, we have our Encouraging Environmental Excellence program. That is a program that recognizes any Ohio business, industry, trade association, not-for-profit, also Ohio schools and communities through the E3C and the E4 programs for their environmental stewardship commitments and sustainability projects. Those applications are also available online, and applications for the 2024 award cycle are open now. You can learn more about that program by visiting epa.ohio.gov/OhioE3. And I will go ahead and get ready to close us out. But before we go, I would just like to remind you one more time about the survey at the end of today's session. We do value your feedback and would love to hear what you have to say about our 2023 Sustainability Conference. Again, thank you so much for joining us this week. It was a pleasure to have you, and we hope you learned a lot. Thank you so much.